everyone, welcome back to BlenderDiplom.com. I'm Gottfried Hofmann and I'm gonna show you this time how to create this slow motion fire effect, the stylized fire here. It's a very cool effect you can use for various things like this explosion here or backgrounds for stencils, as you can see here. And I'm gonna show you another possible use, but I'm not gonna show you how to create this kind of stuff. It's pretty simple. I'm only gonna show you how to create the fire now. Boom. Classic Action 80s. That's another example of how to use this effect we're gonna create. So let's have a look at the final result for a small overview. There's not much in there, just a camera, a smoke domain, an emitter object, and a force field. For the domain, I'm using a simple fire texture, which basically only has yellow and red and a little transparency. That's to get this special kind of look. And I'm using smoke and not fire as my source. So also the emitter is only emitting smoke. And that's because I noticed for this kind of effect, just a simple smoke setting gives you way less hassle with everything. And well, this also makes the fire more like the ink drop effect I've made and not so much like a real fire. And one last thing I have here is a force field, a simple turbulence. And that's it basically. In regards of the rendering setup, I made a few optimizations, like using no anti-aliasing and setting the lighting to shadeless for this cube to make this render extremely fast. And well, these are the basics. In the end, there is a very little bit of compositing, which you might or might not want. And so let's start this scene from scratch. I assume that you already know how to set up a smoke simulation. So let me show you a few shortcuts in this tutorial. And of course, turn on screencast keys. Let me hit space and then search for quick. And here we got quick smoke. If I select this, magically a domain will appear around my emission object. And I can set a few things here. Actually, I can choose between fire and stream, which will be a stream of smoke. And let me choose the stream because I want smoke for this one, not fire. Then let me hit R1 and 5 on the numpad to go into orthographic side view and scale the domain a little bit. G, Z, move it upwards quite a bit, but keep a little space between the emitter and the lower boundary of the domain, because if those intersect or are too near to each other, the domain will go crazy, or the simulation. Then let me select the camera, go into camera view, and move this camera up quite a bit. G, Z for the Z-axis. And now let me hit Alt-A to simulate this. And before I hit render now, let me turn off anti-aliasing. We don't need this if we only have smoke. And not doing anti-aliasing will speed up our renders quite a bit. Now let's hit F12. And we can see the smoke by being dark here and lit a little bit here. It's lit by this lamp. And the gray thing in the render actually was our background, which I will set to black. Next thing I want to do, I want to have simulation with a little bit more high resolution and more details. So let me go to the physics tab, and the domain is of course already set up. Let me change the divisions to 64, which will mean that I'll have a lot more detail in the simulation. And then let me also change the vorticity to 3.5 because I want a lot of small turbulence going on. Vorticity will actually not mean the strength of the turbulence, but how many small pieces of turbulence you will have. Then let me turn on smoke adaptive domain. This will just save baking time and smoke high resolution. I'll keep the divisions at 1 and change the mapper to FFT, which is a little bit sharper than Wavelet and perfect for renderings of fire. I'll set the strength to 1. This will mean we won't actually get a lot of high resolution noise, but this will more like smooth out our noise, so it's very sharp and big structures very well for this kind of fire. Now, if I hit Alt-A, nothing should happen, and that's because I haven't saved my file yet. So let me save it. And now I can go here to Smoke Cache, hit Bake, and wait a little bit until there is some smoke showing up. Let me stop it at 25%. And now let's see Alt-A. And there's actually something going on here. Now I don't want to do the next test render right now, but first change the materials of the domain a little bit. Let me go here to the material settings. And it's already set up quite nicely. First thing I want to do, I want to turn off the lighting to shadeless, because I want the material to basically light itself using emission. And then we don't need any shading, which will come from the lights in the scene. So let me turn the emission up to 5 and from black to white. And I don't need any reflection, so let's turn it off to 0. And let me also delete the light here. Good. Now we got the material with emission set up, but if I render, you'll see nothing at all. And if I turn on the horizon color to white, you might notice that we got now a shadeless material that's emitting black. Very strange, but true. The reason for this is that I haven't changed the textures yet for our domain. So let me go to Material Textures, and you see we got 2 textures, Smoke Density and Flame. And if you go to Flame, nothing is there, and you might wonder, Flame? We're using only smoke. Well, the quick smoke setup will only also set up a texture for flame, which you usually won't notice because there is no emission. But I've turned on emission, and this will also change the emission, as you see here. But it has no source. The source is flame, and we don't have any flames here. So let me simply change this to smoke. And now do a test render once again, and we see the first bit of emission, but it's still very, very dark. So what can we do? Well, let me go down here. First of all, change this here, and the mapping is also okay. This will influence the density, it's okay. And let's see, we got this color ramp here. So this color ramp will influence the density. Yeah, that's okay. It will influence the emission. I don't want this. I want to have the emission stay the same, but only change the emission color. That's also okay. And now the blend. The blend is set to mix. But we had this high strong emission, and the emission was white. So let's set it to multiply. So the emission just gets darker. And now let's see what's happening now. And yeah, here we got our nice emission. But it's still, of course, way too strong. So let me change the colors here. First thing I want to do is I want to switch these two, because I'd like the red part to be inside and the bright yellow part to be outside, actually. And I'm doing this because I'll make it more orangish. And I'm basically doing this because, yeah, I want a stylized flame, not so much a realistic one. Then let me change this reddish and darker for the inside of the flame. And the very inside, I want to be completely opaque. So let's turn this black and the alpha to 0. Now if we render again, yeah, we're getting there. But there's one thing I don't like yet, and that is my flame is totally opaque. So I only see the structures from the let's call it surface, but not what's going on in the inside. And we can change this by making this a little more transparent. Let's set the outside to 0.5 and the inside to 0.2. And now if we render, we see that we are actually getting there. We might change this later on when we have also changed our behavior of the flames, as I call it. Actually, it's smoke. But first, I want to go back to the Materials tab and go down there to Integration and reduce the step size, because here we got, maybe you don't see this very well, but we got a lot of noise going on. Well, let me increase this so you can see it better. This noise is actually coming from the integrator for our volume material. The lower we set the step size, the less noise we will have. So let me set this to a very small value like 0.03. And now if I render again, this looks really, really smooth compared to before when we had this high value and everything was very crisp. And this is also changing the look of our simulation a little bit, because now the renderer can get more of the finer details of our simulation. Okay, let me stop this. And now let's go on changing the behavior of our simulation. First of all, let's look a bit at the settings of the emitter. It's the flow source at the moment is set to mesh, but smoke will only emit from the surface. I also wanted to emit smoke from the volume as well, and let's set it to 1, so the entire volume of our cube will now emit smoke. Second, let's turn off the absolute density, which will mean if we emit here something, then if the smoke rises, then the new thing that's emitted in the next frame will add up to the wild things that are already there. Pretty cool if you want really dense smoke. And one thing I also want is I want to animate the density in a way that for the first 5 frames we are emitting smoke and then we are emitting nothing anymore. So let me go over the density button with the mouse and hit I for inserting a keyframe. Then let's go 1 frame further by hitting right arrow, and then let's turn this down to 0 and hit I again. Now this will only be a puff of smoke, and we can free the bake and bake things again. And now we should see just a small mushroom shaped cloud. Okay, 25% should be enough. And here we got it. A mushroom-like cloud. And let's also go up a little further where we got a little more vorticity. And let's hit render. And this is already actually looking pretty cool. But I'd like a little bit more turbulence going on in there. And I also might change the colors here later on. Oh, let me do this right now. Here's our texture. Let's first change this to ease. Then make this a little sharper, this part here, so we got more, so we don't have these big parts here, but more like more detailed, sharper areas. And here we got our nice small details. And we might also reduce the strength of the emission a little bit. So yeah, we will need to do a lot of tweaking here. So let me reduce the strength of the emission here in shading. Emission, let's say 3. And now we should be able to get way more details than we had before. So our fire is looking pretty cool now, but there are two things I'd like to be changed. First of all, I don't like the shape of this bulb or puff of fire that's coming out here. I'd like it to be a lot more turbulent and not this roundish, especially here with this even like surface type structure or surface like structure. And the way I get more turbulence into a simulation is by using force fields. Let me hit Shift A, add force field turbulence. A force field only has settings for physics, and here we can set the strength. 1 is usually too little for smoke simulations. I most often use 5. Let's keep the size for the moment. And then there's this other setting that's called flow. Flow will basically mean that the force field won't add forces to our simulation over time, but simply change the direction of the flow of our smoke, which is makes a lot more sense than setting flow to 0, because if I would set it to 0, the puff of smoke would move to all direction actually and get bigger, and this way we can keep the shape of our puff, but it will just be more turbulent. So I've baked this, and if you see the smoke moving up now, it's nice and curly, a lot of turbulence. This will look really cool, but it's going way too fast for my taste. I want this to be slower. And you might think, well, if you want the smoke to rise slower or to move slower, we can simply reduce the speed of the simulation here in the time scale. The lower we set this scale value, the slower the simulation will be. But let's see what's happening if we set it to 0.2, the lowest value allowed. If we hit bake, this is actually baking a lot faster. Well, that's of course pretty simple. The smaller we have the time steps, the less is changing between two simulation steps and the less it has to compute. But let's see how this is looking. And it's of course going slow, but if you see where it's rising up, it's very, there's little turbulence in it. It's very smoothed out. And that's what the problem with the timescale value. If you lower the timescale, that means if you make your simulation slower, it will also get smoothed out. It's a general problem with the algorithm the smoke simulation in Blender is using. So this is not working for our purposes. But I found a way how I can still have slowly upwards moving smoke. So generally slowly moving further smoke without these problems of anything getting smoothed out. And that is, I simply did not change the timescale, set it back to 1, but the temperature difference. So the higher this value is, the faster the smoke will rise. If I set this to a lower value like 0.03 and hit bake, then in the end the smoke will rise slower, but we will still have the curliness. And since we used the force field here, we will actually get even more curliness than before. I guess 50% is already enough to see the effect. Yep. So now you see all these nice and curly things. And if this is too curly for you, here's the cool trick how you can lower the speed even more. And that is by simply combining the effects of the temperature difference with our setup will actually increase the curliness, and the time scale, which will reduce it. So let me set this to 0.5 and now bake again. And then we should have a slowly rising curly smoke that will be looking really, really cool. So here it is, baked. And you see it's moving pretty slowly. So I guess I should actually have increased the end frames for the simulation and of course for our animation a bit. but it's nice and curly, yet moving slowly. And this is how it looks rendered. I might have used a little longer emission time, so I got more smoke, especially down here, but all in all it's really looking pretty cool. We don't have this bulb-like shape, it has nice structure and everything. We can look through the entire smoke part and see a lot of fine details. So let's go on to the very last step of this tutorial, which is the compositing. But remember, by using combinations of the time scale and the temperature difference, you can control the amount of curliness in your simulation, and by adjusting these two, you can get the result that you like. Here I am in the compositor. I've already attached the viewer node and turn on use node, so we got this backdrop. And for the compositing of this effect, I used only 2 nodes. First of all, a color balance node to control the look of my flame a little bit, because this way we can adjust the look of the highlights and the darker parts and everything. So this is actually looking quite cool, I think. And then a filter glare node to add some nice, glare. And let's connect this also with the composite. So in the end, if you render, it's working out fine. Here in the glare node, I will change this to fog glow, which will mean there will be just a little bit of glow. Then the threshold will say how strong our... let me just turn this down to 0.3. And now we got some glow here in the center and around here, even going outside of the picture as well. Let's increase the size a little bit. And well, the fog glow will just give you a slight glow. If I set the quality to low, the glow will be even bigger. And yeah, this is how I created the compositing. It's pretty simple, just the glare set to fog glow and the threshold of 0.3. If I increase it to 1, there won't be any glow. But if I reduce it, you will see that more and more darker parts will start to glow. And I wanted to glow, everything to glow. So even the more reddish parts, and that's how I did the compositing here. Let me set this to even to 0.2. And now I can render it. This will look really cool as a background for various things. Like, for example, the examples I showed you at the beginning, like make an explosion background for an 80s movie intro, or use it as for a stencil, so you get fonts that are burning like fire in the inside. There's so much you can do with this backgrounds. It's a very common element actually, and lots of types of motion graphics and even normal graphics design in illustration and everywhere. And with Blender, you have the power to create the fire just as the way as you want. So, thanks for watching. I hope you learned a bit in this tutorial, and happy blending!